Welcome to Highly Sensitive, Happily Married, the podcast that teaches you to not only have an easier marriage as a sensitive woman, but to have one that feels more amazing by the day. Where you'll hear relatable stories, love advice that works, and coaching on how to have a marriage where feeling upset and disconnected is a thing of the past, and where instead a sense of loving connection and even fun and lightness is the norm. I'm Hannah Brooks, highly sensitive person, love expert, and marriage coach, and I'm so happy to be on this journey with you. Hello and welcome, my friends. Today I have a fun and different kind of episode for you with a special expert guest. We are going to talk wacky hormones, PMS, perimenopause, and such, and how they impact our relationships and our lives as highly sensitive people. Because not only do I have personal experience with how detrimentally these times of month and hormones can affect our personal relationships, I certainly have experience with that. I've definitely seen it lots and lots in my work with my clients. And that certain times of month are when like all the arguments happen, all the questioning of the relationship happens, all the feelings of just being so annoyed and irritated with their partner. So I know for some of you, that's a real thing that you experience. And for some of you, certainly not necessarily all of you, but for some of you, getting your hormones into a healthier place may be the first work to make your relationship and life better before or while you're embarking on the mental, emotional, and relational work necessary to have a thriving marriage. So I thought I'd bring someone onto the show who can help you understand and work with your hormones if you're having these kinds of experiences, so that you can be less moody, so you can feel better, so you can have the whole month be easier on your relationship. So let me introduce Christine Maccarroll. She's a functional nutritionist and host of the Bitch Fix podcast. She is an expert at kind of getting out of wacky hormones, getting your wacky hormones back in balance so you can have your mood and energy back. So welcome, Christine. I'm really so happy to have you on the podcast.
Thank you, Hannah. That was a fun introduction. And it's fun to be on this side of the mic. So good to be here.
Yay. So I know you have your own backstory as to how you got into this. And you do also know a little bit about high sensitivity, or a lot bit. So I'm just curious what got you into this particular line of work with hormones and functional medicine.
Yeah. So I think a lot of people in my kind of work get into this from some sort of personal health challenge. Mine actually didn't start with my personal stuff, although that came into play later. But I had my younger daughter. So I have two girls, and my younger daughter, this was like 10 years ago, was diagnosed with a neurological speech disorder. So it's called apraxia. And it basically meant that her brain and her mouth weren't talking to each other. So she knew what she wanted to say, but she was unable to get her words out. And that diagnosis led me down like a 6-month rabbit hole of trying to figure out how to help my kid. And I went through all of the traditional routes, and we started speech therapy and, kind of followed what her pediatrician said, but really we weren't getting anywhere. And we also didn't have any information. So no one really told me anything about what to expect, other than I talked to other parents online. And I'm hearing like, teenage kids who have like 3 words. And that just sounded terrible to me. And I just thought there had to be a way for me to help my daughter heal. So we, through all of that research that I was doing, because I'm a crazy research lady, through all of the research I was doing trying to help her, I came up with some nutritional interventions, and they were relatively straightforward, but also very high dose for some particular nutrients. And so then I had to go about the path of finding someone to work with us, which was not easy. That's a whole other story in itself. But her pediatrician didn't want to touch that with a 10-foot pole. I spent months trying to find someone to help us, and then finally was able to find someone, and within 2 weeks of starting my daughter on these nutrients, she started talking in like sentences. And she had like one word, she had like lost words, and she got to the point where she had like ba for ball. Like that was where we had gotten in traditional speech therapy. So it was this like ridiculous light switch moment when her body got what it needed. And I was stunned, and also like it was like I couldn't unsee what I saw. And so at that point I decided, this like understanding what our bodies need, and how to repair if something isn't being available, it's not available to us, and therefore we're having these signs of dysfunction. Well, how can we figure out what's going on and then get the body what it needs so it can just restore balance on its own? So I completely changed my line of work. I went back to school. I was like, woman on a mission, could not unsee this. And so that's how I got into this line of work in general. How I got into hormones and the women's impact on this is that while I was going through all this with my daughter, basically I just trashed my own health. So, and I see this with so many women that I talk to. We put our families first.
Yes.
And I was working a 40-hour-a-week job. I had a corporate job and manager level. And I was also taking my daughter to all of these speech therapy appointments, and then like staying up all night doing my research. Right. And so I just tanked myself. Like I flatlined, and figuring out like how to crawl myself out of that hole and get my own body back on track is how I got interested in supporting women and women's health. So it started with my daughter and then ended up with me.
Wow. What an amazing story. It's really powerful. So, it's interesting as you're talking about tanking too. And it's so true. I see so many women really putting their children in particular first, which is amazing. And also what happens so often is exactly what you're talking about, is it comes at your own expense, which, if you stay in that tanked out place, that's not actually good for your family either. So, and it's also interesting what I find with highly sensitive women is because things impact us, especially like, how do I say that? Like everything has a tendency to affect us even deeper than non-highly sensitive people. It's, I find that it can be common for women, maybe not to go to the hugely tanking place that it sounds like you went to, but like go closer to that than a lot of non-highly sensitive people. So it's interesting to hear your story, and I'm just excited to hear what else you're going to share with us, because, that it's not, so you tell me where I'm wrong and we'll get into this, but when we go into those spaces of total burnout, our stress levels just really super affect our hormones.
Oh, of course.
Yeah. And of course, all parts of our body, functionality. So, and our, therefore our mood, etc. So really interesting. And just as sort of like an introductory question to PMS and perimenopause and highly sensitive people, just like I was saying, like everything tends to affect highly sensitive people, especially. Have you, and again, I don't know if your clients are like, hey, I'm highly sensitive, by the way, right? Or your patients, but maybe you have some sense of that, or do you see that with hormones and PMS and perimenopause, that highly sensitive people tend to have more challenges there? Or do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So, I think all hormones affect all humans in general, particularly women. Yes. And I think about this as like hormones are like the lens that you see the world through, right? So it's like, what color glasses are you wearing? And are you wearing the PMS glasses today?
Yes.
And when your hormones are funky, it just makes all of the rest of everything seem worse, because that's the lens we're viewing.
Yes.
And so if you're extra sensitive, if you're a highly sensitive person, and we have that underlying already, and then we put those glasses on, it's going to be like that much more challenging. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's so good. It's like the double glasses. Because I'm always talking about, like, I call them sometimes flossite, or I call it flossite, right? Where we're putting on like the puke colored glasses or everything. We're just like just seeing the bad things, right?
Yeah, totally.
I also call it lizard brain, right? So have that going on, and that tends to be more intense in highly sensitive people, and then add the hormonal lenses, right?
Yeah.
It's just like, whoa.
Then we're just amplifying the entire situation. Yeah. If hormones are dysregulated, it's going to automatically affect mood. Again, like it's going to affect mood for anybody, but if you're highly sensitive, it will impact your mood that much more. And then it also usually takes longer to recover. Right. So then we have an additional recovery period on top of what was already maybe a challenging situation.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. So like once the hormones sort of shift back to maybe a better, more conducive to emotional balance state, then there's still the recovery.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so interesting. Yeah.
But if you're in greater balance, then it's also going to be less of a stretch to come back to center, right? So like if you're out of balance and we are stretching that rubber band to, a really like close to breaking point, harder to come back to center. But if we have kind of a not that stretched rubber band and we stretch it a little bit, it's not that hard to come back to center, right? So that's where the better that system is regulated, the entire endocrine system, which is just your hormone system, the better that's regulated, the more resilient you are in general.
Yes. Yeah. So do you want to share a little bit about like specifically how, when our hormones are kind of wacky? And again, I know that PMS is different from perimenopause. There's, as far as I understand it, so you're the expert, so correct me where I'm wrong, but obviously PMS is more like for people who have not yet gone through perimenopause, but if and when we are going through perimenopause, PMS symptoms can be stronger or bigger. And then there's other things that come along with perimenopause too. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm kind of that age of moving into or already somewhere in the perimenopausal phase. And it's been interesting.
Me too. I feel you.
And it's like very unpredictable. But so, like if you would just share some like traditional signs and effects that tends to have, both like, in all sorts of ways, and on our moods, and then on other aspects of our lives, bodies.
Yeah. So first, just like, I'm going to kind of like outline where that perimenopause happens, because I don't think everyone is totally aware. So perimenopause is just the period of your life before menopause. And menopause is actually a strictly defined period where it's like a line in the sand where you have not had your period for 12 months. So once you cross that, no period, 12 months, it is literally like a moment. So people think of menopause as a time period, but it's really a moment. Like it's like, okay, cross this line, no period for 12 months. In the time leading up to that, that time period could actually be up to 10 years, which most women are not aware of.
I'm aware of that. And I'm like, oh no,
it's a long time. And it's almost like, I think about it, it's like reverse puberty, right? I have my daughters are now 12 and 15. So like all the hormones in this house, let me just tell you. But it's like that happening in reverse. If you remember how you felt when you were going through puberty, I mean, I certainly remember feeling like, just like, what is happening to my body? And then it's kind of like that happening again, but where puberty might take a couple of years, perimenopause, like I said, up to 10 years. And not everyone experiences it that way. Some women can have a shorter time period, but the average onset of menopause is 52. It can start as early as 45, even some women earlier 40s. If you know when your mom went through menopause, that is typically, it's not an exact science, but we tend to pattern closely after mom that way. So, let's say mom hit menopause a little early, like she was 48. You could be 38 and already be in this perimenopause state where things just start to fluctuate. So what PMS and perimenopause have in common, and I'm just simplifying this to the most simple level, right? Because there's a lot. But at the most simple level, there's a drop in one of our primary sex hormones, which is progesterone, as really, I think more of, it's like the thing that impacts our mood the most, right? There's all kinds of hormonal shifts that are happening. Estrogen is dropping, of course, as well in perimenopause. But if we think about estrogen and progesterone as our primary female sex hormones, and again, there's lots of other hormones in our bodies. We also have testosterone, but just like keeping it crazy simple. estrogen and progesterone are supposed to be in relative balance. Again, I'm going to super simplify, but super simplifying, estrogen is relatively more like our energetic go-getter hormone. And progesterone is more like our calming, relaxing hormone. So what happens, and actually this is just like most women right around 40, whether you're in perimenopause or not, right around 40, progesterone falls off a cliff. Which, and you can kind of feel that, right?
Yes,
like it's like,
I have felt
that. So progesterone falls off a cliff. And I just said, it is like the calming, relaxing hormone. So what starts happening is we start being more irritable and anxious and bitchy, right? We have that irritability at a higher level because our chill out hormone has fallen off a cliff. And unfortunately, we do get a preview of this with PMS because in our cycling years, relatively speaking, estrogen is higher than progesterone in the first half of your cycle, but like first 2 weeks-ish. Then you ovulate, then second 2 weeks-ish, we have an increase in progesterone. So what happens right before you get your period is progesterone starts dropping. So progesterone starts dropping. And then when it really kind of does that same fall off a cliff thing, the day or two before your cycle starts, that we get that, then we start our bleeds, right? But if you are, really PMSy, you're probably dropping progesterone a lot, or your estrogen is high relative to progesterone. So in either case, if we're talking about PMS or if we are talking about perimenopause, our chill out hormone is not really helping us in that time. So we're losing the impact of our chill out hormone.
Hey. Wow. So obviously like the impact on our mood is clear, right? And what else? Like I know for me, I from a lot of my friends who are my age, sleep becomes harder. Like I've gone through phases during this time of my life where I'm awake for like an hour or two in the middle of the night. And oftentimes it's like more anxious, like, right. There's more like catastrophic thinking about my children specifically in the middle of the night. Right. What else do people experience?
Yeah. So the sleep is one of the biggest things. Certainly just sense of like well-being and mood are altered. So looking kind of one level deeper into what's happening in our brains. First of all, we have receptors for estrogen, progesterone throughout the body, including the brain. So with progesterone specifically, we have this metabolite, which is just basically like when we metabolize, when our body uses and uses up progesterone, we get this metabolite called allopregnanolone. And what that is it's called an agonist, which means it just like binds to receptors for a neurotransmitter called GABA in our brains. And the GABA is the main neurotransmitter that's inhibitory, meaning that calms us down. It promotes sleep in particular. It promotes calmness. It promotes good mood. And so there's this link between when progesterone goes down that we start to have lower functioning of GABA. So whether or not it changes in amount, we get lowered function. And then the downstream effect of that is more anxiety. Typically, some women experience more depression, but I would say in all my clients, I typically see anxiety or anxious mood or sleep issues. And then the other thing that can happen is everything's in balance in our bodies, right? So I was just talking about estrogen, progesterone. Those are kind of supposed to be in a balanced relationship. GABA, again, thinking about neurotransmitters, which are just, regulators of chemical signaling in our brain. If GABA is lower, it can allow other neurotransmitters that are more of the like excitatory ones to come up. So we could have again, anxiety, other mood stuff, more sleep, kind of like all of that, just like feeling like, I almost think about it as like a wound up, coil, right? Because all of the things, neurotransmitter wise, hormone wise, that are supposed to be kind of helping us feel better are just not there. So one of the first things that I always I check with women who are starting to go into perimenopause is where your progesterone levels are, because progesterone is just, like I said, is the primary thing that starts to go off. And it's one of the easier things actually for us to relatively get back into balance.
Amazing. I'm already learning so much. I feel like I just had you on just for me. Like, oh, I mean, I've listened to your podcast specifically about this, and but yeah, so good. So amazing to hear. So, and then like in terms of, so I'm excited to ask you about like solutions to that and like suggestions you have about that. But before we go there, I'm curious about, in your work with women, do they talk about how this affects things at home and impacts their relationship?
Yeah. Honestly, like I think relationships are like a primary concern for almost every woman, right? And I always start my work with women asking them like, why does this matter to you? Because like, why is it important? Because if we are, tied to what were our outcomes emotionally, and I'm sure you see this too, and we're tied to our outcomes emotionally, we're more likely to, to work towards what changes we need to do, right?
Definitely.
And ultimately it almost always comes down to relationships. And it's fun, like the way that I came up with the name of my podcast, the Bitch Fix, is because all of these women were coming to me and saying like, I just feel so bitchy.
Totally.
And let's unpack that. And they're like, it doesn't, like, I don't feel like myself. I feel like I'm bitchy to my spouse. I'm bitchy to my kids. It's like, I can't get it under control. And so I just heard it so much.
Yes.
Like, okay, like I'm just going to call a spade here, right? We're just going to talk about the thing. But it was always like, what this is really, it's impacting my relationships. And exactly. And I think, just biologically, and I almost feel like I can get flack for this in the time we live in, but like biologically,
I know
we're the procreative, like we carry the kids, we raise the kids.
Yes.
Typically. And I think that has just primed us at a biological level to be really sensitive to our environment and our relationships. Like biologically, like, I mean, even I think about like going to the beach and my kid, like I said, my kids are 12 and 15. My husband will be like, hey, like take a nap. It's fine. Like I absolutely cannot freaking take a nap if my kids are playing in the water. Totally. It doesn't matter that it's like, they know how to swim and they're like a teenage, it doesn't matter. Like my mom brain is so aware of where my children are. And so I think we're just biologically driven to like manage the relationship with our kids. And we also, I think I'm again, like, research supports this. Like we are biologically, we are the connectors. And so we are going to be more in tune with what's happening with our spouse, our partner as well. And so
definitely,
I think that the concern about what's happening to the relationships is like it's usually the reason I'm talking to somebody. Like women, they don't like feeling off, but they really don't like feeling like they're off and it's impacting their relationships.
Yes, absolutely. And I think also it comes out a lot, like that irritability specifically gets oriented around those closer relationships, the kids. But I find especially, and maybe that's just the lens I look at life through, right? Because that's what I do as I work with on marriages, but especially with the significant other. And so versus like as much at work, right? Or like that you can see, I think a lot of women see it most primarily showing up in their relationship. And like, again, like I was saying earlier, I call it more lizard brain activities going on, right? Like more flossite, more blame can happen, more judgment of the other person. We can be more easily hurt. We can be more reactive, right? And of course, all that irritability. And I don't know, like one thing I also have noticed is for some women, it's like there's less desire to be touched in any way. And like I said, more arguments. And then there's the less sleep thing or the trouble with sleep, which just only exacerbates all of that.
Well, I think like it's being touchy, but when you're touchy, you don't want to be touched.
Right.
Exactly. Like, oh, I'm too sensitive. But so throughout our menstrual cycle, if you're naturally cycling and you're not on like a hormonal birth control, we have different not only do we experience our relationships differently, other people experience us differently. So we are like, there's some fascinating stuff. So like first part of your cycle through about ovulation, we are primed for connection in general, certainly with people of the opposite sex. For married women, we are also more attractive to them. So
interesting like things, pheromones and
so the pheromones, but we also like this is like wild. Our features are more symmetrical, which makes us look more appealing to everybody.
So weird.
Right. And this is like outside of the bounds of like, pretty, it's all just like everyone, all cultures find symmetrical features appealing. And we are more symmetrical the first half of our cycle, super wild. Right around ovulation, like the couple days before, we get this big spike in estrogen. And you probably, like, I always feel more attracted to my husband at that time. For sure. It's like, hey, babe, like, my body wants to make babies. I don't want to make any more babies. I'm totally done with that. But like my body's like, hey, baby making time.
Yes.
He's going to look hot and I'm going to look more appealing to him.
Oh, totally.
Pheromones are coming. So our connection will be better because I'm primed biologically to be making babies.
Yes.
Right.
Which just going to like pop in there because I might forget if I don't. Like, I oftentimes encourage my own self and my clients to lean into this time, right? Like, like make the most of that while it's going, right? Like you can plan your kind of month around that, like, because you want to take advantage while it's there.
Yeah, absolutely. I look at this like when I'm doing, like I've held some like live events. We have our most energy around that time too. I had an event like 3-4 years ago. And it was like going to be like a 3-day, 12-hour days. And I was like, there is no way I'm doing this anytime but around ovulation because I'm just not going to have the energy the rest of the month. And so, we have good energy. We are primed for connection, particularly with our partners. It's juicy. That's great. We should take advantage of that. And then unfortunately, it's kind of like a sugar roller coaster, right? Like you get the sugar high and then later you're like, the bottom drops out. And then, so the bottom kind of drops out, especially if we're in a state where progesterone's getting lower or we're in estrogen dominance, which I can define in a second. But if we are in that state, then we are not going to have the balance that we need. And then all of a sudden, we're past that time. Our partner no longer looks attractive and sexy to us. We notice all their flaws. And then of course, it's like both things. Like we're probably snipping at them, so they're not as interested. And also, like, we're all of our pheromones are not quite the height that they were to buffer any relationship stuff that's coming up.
Well, and it's also, I mean, what's sort of segue here? I don't think, like, I've done a lot of work on I've tried to do a lot of work on my hormones, not super successfully. I have various health issues that play into all of this for me. I don't know. It's felt like kind of a little bit of a stuck place for me. But what's fascinating is over the years and doing the work that I do, right, is like I help my clients and myself with harder emotions, right? Like how to prevent, how to move through them, how to navigate them in the most peaceful, graceful way, right? By directly working with the mind and the emotions and the nervous system. And what's happened over the years is I've gotten so much better at handling those harder weeks, not months, right? Sometimes it feels like months. And it's just like I've watched things get easier and easier between my husband and I because I have those skills. And that's amazing. And so I think I just want to like point that what you were just sharing is really helpful to normalize it for women who, not to like, to normalize. By that, I don't mean don't try to do anything about it. Right. But like to know, to be able to see, to help us have awareness and to help us know, okay, this is where I'm at. I'm in this second part of my cycle where it's like going to be more likely that I feel this way and that I'm not as attracted to him or that he's not, you're right, that we're more snippy with each other. Again, not to say just accept that, or what's the word? Just tolerate that, but to have some more acceptance around it so that you're not then reacting to it like, oh no, I must hate my husband. He must be the wrong partner for me. Right. Or like, I think that's so important.
Yeah. Well, there's not something inherently wrong with either of us, right? There's not something inherently wrong with us because we happen to be cycling.
Yes.
There's not something inherently wrong with him because we're looking at him through a different set of
Exactly. And even the fact that there might be more reactivity between you. Like I notice, like if I'm a little more snippy with my husband, he is not great at not snipping back. Right. Yeah. So like, and both of us have learned, and again, it's gotten so much better, but like both of us have learned, it's like, okay, well, it's that the reason that we're a little bit more like that is because I'm in that time of my cycle. Not because there's something wrong with us.
Right. And it doesn't have to be judgy. It's just to be like, okay, this is like true right now.
Yes.
So we can just work with that or we can fight it. But like, okay.
Yes.
Understanding that this is like biology is, I think it takes some of the sting out.
Yeah. Oh, it's so true. So that's a beautiful takeaway for people listening. So I'm kind of curious, like when I work with people, I do all that other stuff, but I don't address anything nutritional, which is one of your main places of expertise. So like nutritionally and lifestyle wise, what do you suggest? Like, how can we support ourselves to navigate these times better? And, you know, not just during the times, but overall helping us shift those hormones a little bit.
So I think about this hormonally, and then even just thinking about like, you know, brain and mood as like hardware, software, right? So the thinking about your emotions, understanding your hormone state, understanding how to work through with your nervous system, how to calm yourself, what your relationships look like, all of that I think of as like, that's the software, right? So that is required for functioning. But the hardware piece is also important. Like I, been switching over from this 7-year-old's computer to a new computer recently. It's like, no matter how many times I upgrade the software, when you're dealing with a 7-year-old computer, the hardware is just like, it's not working anymore. Right. So, when we have good hardware, which is like, what is your physical biology allowing for, then it's easier for that software to run well. So it's easier for us to think about and help ourselves walk through challenges because we are in a better physical state. And I think they play off each other, right? So those are like interrelated things. So with our hardware, the first thing I always introduce to women when they're thinking their hormones are out of balance is that even though like you and I have just been talking about our sex hormones, biologically, as far as our bodies are concerned, our sex hormones are what I call the small dogs. And we have other hormones that are the big dogs. And by big dogs, I just mean like, they're like the puppeteers. Like when those things are out of balance, they are more likely to have a bigger impact. And then they are actually also going to have a downstream effect on the small dogs. So our big dog hormones, number one is actually insulin. Insulin is just blood sugar regulation, right? So we don't think about that as a hormone, but it is. And so if blood sugar is off, we're going to have a massive impact to energy and mood. And typically I see mood and energy following blood sugar. So if blood sugar is dysregulated, like, I mean, I can just tell you, like, if it's, if I rarely miss lunch. Let's say I missed lunch. Happened more, back when I was destroying my health. If I missed lunch and I'm like in a super low blood sugar state, and I came home and I was hangry and I'm like rummaging in the pantry myself. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like I feel so, I mean, it's like the Snickers commercial, right? And I don't recommend Snickers, by the way, but
yes,
if you have that like Snickers, hunger diva thing going on. And then if one of my kids walked up to me and is like, Mom, what's for dinner? Like, I'm going to bite their heads off and be like, why did you only ever ask me about dinner? Damn it. Like, you didn't even ask me about my day. Right. So, but if I like was in a good physiological place, if I had lunch and it was a good lunch and my blood sugar was even and they're asking me about dinner, I'm going to be like totally a better place to just answer their questions. Right? The blood sugar, insulin regulation, that's like big dog number one. Big dog number two is cortisol, which is stress. And there is the psychological stress, which I think is what you were talking about, but there is physiological stress too. So things that are physiological stressors to our body, even including things like food sensitivities or digestive problems or just anything else that's going on with our physiology is going to impact our cortisol, which is our stress hormone, which is the second big dog. The last big dog is thyroid. And there isn't as much like our direct impact on that. That's something you would want to look at with blood work. But thyroid is absolutely a big dog, and it tends to get dysregulated in women way more than men. So if I was just going to go back to like the first and easiest one to manage for anybody who's listening, the first and easiest one to manage is blood sugar. And the biggest challenge I see nutritionally for women with blood sugar is that they are under eating protein and overeating processed carbs. So when we undereat protein, first of all, protein is required for hormone production. It's also required for neurotransmitter production. So what's happening with your brain and therefore your mood and energy. So it's also going to impact our satiety, which is just like, do we feel full or are we like going to be scrounging around in the pantry for, the pack of cookies? So eating enough protein, almost every woman I think that I start working with has under eating protein. And it's such a straightforward, I won't say easy, it's such a straightforward issue, but it's not necessarily easy because a lot of women are, it's hard for them to get their minds around eating more protein. And then
is there some sort of like amount to shoot for protein?
Yeah. So I definitely personalize it with my clients, but like the baseline level to be looking at is between 0.8 and 2 grams, which I know is a wide range, and 2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. So if you went online and you like put in a calculator to translate your weight into kilograms, and then 0.8 to 2 grams of protein for that. I would say 0.8 is actually really on the lower side, especially for women who have issues. So sometimes we have to bump up higher than that, and then you can drop down for maintenance. But I would guess a majority of women would do that math, and then they would track their food for a couple of days, and they would figure out they were under eating protein. So that is like sound like a lot. Yeah. Easy step number one. And then the overdoing the processed carbs, what happens is, and there's a lot of research behind this, when we undereat protein, our bodies are searching for it. And so we are overeating processed carbs really in an effort to satisfy protein needs that are not being met. And so then that's when we're like, it doesn't matter if you have a sweet tooth or a salty tooth, right? You're going to be searching for cookies or chips. It doesn't matter. You're searching for something that you're not getting. And so if you start with protein, it's way easier to chill out on the processed carbs because we've gotten like that primary lever balanced. So, I mean, I could go on and on about all of the food stuff and the lifestyle stuff, but I would say food wise, I would start with protein. The other thing is sleep. So with again, and I know like, especially like young moms, and I don't know the age of everyone listening to this, but like when your kids are little, either if they don't sleep or they just get up. I had a early bird kid who got up at 5 every morning. Just our sleep is maybe not as good and not as regular. And it is like primary for hormone production. There's all sorts of, like we have a circadian rhythm for our hormone cycles. So if our normal rhythm is off, and you were mentioning sleep problems earlier, if we don't get sleep in check, then it's kind of like this vicious cycle where we don't get sleep in check. Our blood sugar and stress hormone regulation will be off then the next day, then that's going to impact sleep the following night. Then hunger and stress hormones are more off the following day. And it just keeps going. And blood sugar, by the way, also massively impacted by lack of sleep. So it's a downward vicious cycle. And if we can get sleep in order, we have, better stress hormone, we have better thyroid production, we have better blood sugar, all of those things get into better balance. So if I was just going to say like 2 things to super focus on, eat enough protein and protect your sleep. Like it is the most precious, valuable thing.
I love that. Well, and it's true. I personally, I stopped getting up as early as I used to for a couple of reasons, partially because I just was listening to myself. I was like, I think my body wants a little bit more sleep. And although it's like changed when I do my yoga or my meditation or eliminated some of it or reduced how often I do it, I feel a lot better because I'm getting probably an extra hour almost of sleep a night.
Yeah. It is what, so I do a lot of, I don't know if you're familiar with this term biohacking, but basically like I track all the things and I try and like, I try and see what like levers I can pull.
Yeah.
And I've been wearing this little, like, it looks like a watch. It's called a hoop strap.
Uh-huh.
People use Oura rings. Like there's different kinds of trackers you can use, but like direct impact I can see on like when I get sufficient sleep, but even like, quality of sleep and quantity of sleep, like when those are good, then my ability to do anything else the next day. So like, it's like you get a score for like recovery ability to do, like land your day. Right.
Yes.
And it's like, it's just crazy. And, for a while I was also tracking blood sugar every morning. And like when my sleep is off, my blood sugar is immediately funky, like just instantly.
Fascinating. Yeah.
And then blood sugar's off and then mood's off. Like it just all is a cascade.
Totally. Fascinating. Well, so those are I love the simplicity of what you just shared, like sleep, protein
with your life.
Yes. Are there any like top, I know magnesium keeps standing out in my brain. I'm like magnesium, I don't know, right? Partially for sleep, but are there like a couple supplemental things that you'd recommend?
Yeah. So almost every woman, you're right, is deficient in magnesium. I've done at least one episode on magnesium. There's different forms, so you have to be careful. Citrate is the form usually, like if just looking at like the common brand that everyone knows is Calm. And that's a citrate form. Citrate's good for sleep. It also will make you poop. So you don't want to overdo the magnesium citrate at night because you might end up with the runs in the morning, which could ruin your day. So be careful. Glycinate is a good form. Malate is a good form. Those tend to be good for sleep. And really, like for a form besides citrate, like glycinate or something, I actually like recommend women just kind of keep going up until you hit that. It's called bowel tolerance, until you hit the point where you might be a little loose in the day. Because most of us, again, like in our modern world, our food system is very depleted of magnesium. Even if you're eating a great diet, our soils don't have magnesium at the levels they used to. So most of us are walking around magnesium deficient. I can think of one person in the last almost decade that I know of who was deficient on magnesium. Like when I first started working with one person. Yeah. So like everybody in my house takes magnesium. I take a pretty good, and I take mixed, like I take different forms at night, and that does help with sleep. Nice. Good quality probiotic. There is a direct relationship between what's happening in our gut, our microbiome, which is just like the colony of good, friendly bacteria that live in our gut. So we have a circadian rhythm dictated by the microbiome. There's a gut-brain connection. Again, like we could do hours talking about that, but probiotics and even like probiotic foods. So like anything fermented, cultured, those are good. And then there are some specific amino acids, which are just kind of like when you eat protein that I've been hammering home, you get amino acids. Like that's how we break that down in our body. I'm cautious saying something like that up front, just as a general recommendation, because I do find most women have like different responses to different amino acids, but a couple that people can play with, and it's easy because if you don't have a good response to it, like it clears from your body really fast. But GABA would be one to try. I was talking about, GABA is a neurotransmitter that's affected by progesterone earlier. So GABA is one to try that a lot of women respond well to for sleep. And then theanine is another generally calming amino acid.
I take that one. Yeah.
And they work nicely together too. A lot of women have good benefit from taking GABA and theanine together.
Nice.
I've started doing genetic assessment for women in my practice. So I actually can see what's affecting your body and why you're not sleeping from a genetic perspective, like what nutrients, amino acids, whatever are aligned with your biology. But there's not a problem with experimenting, and amino acids are cheap. So, those are two to maybe try for someone who's struggling with sleep.
Yes. Wow. Amazing. And I know when I listened to specifically your PMS podcast, I don't know if you know off the top of your head what episode that was.
It was way at the beginning.
Yeah, it was at the beginning.
It
was like 13 or I don't know, somewhere down in there. You shared a bunch of different foods and supplements and such. So if people are wanting to know more about that piece, that's such a great podcast episode for that. So maybe I'll put the direct link to that one in the show notes so they can listen to more.
Perfect. Yeah.
But I think that simplicity again of like, start with the looking at the protein and working on your sleep. That's going to help so much. It sounds like.
Yep. Yeah. And then blood sugar regulation also impacts sleep. So if blood sugar is dysregulated, like one of the big things that can happen is, especially like, women who are trying low carb or intermittent fasting or something like that, which I actually don't love for most women. But the impact can be that blood sugar crashes in the middle of the night. And then cortisol, that stress hormone, will rise in response to the decrease in blood sugar in the middle of the night. So making sure blood sugar is solid during the day will impact your ability of your body to regulate that and not be waking up from a blood sugar perspective overnight.
Yes. That makes so much sense. It's like one of the questions I've always had about intermittent fasting, which I've never successfully really, or felt like was right for me for some reason, is that blood sugar piece. Because I was like, well, if I'm not, I always felt like I'm a little sensitive to blood sugar crashes. And so like not eating for that long stretch. Yeah,
not great for cycling women. Some women in menopause, like depending on what's going on with them, may be able to do some intermittent fasting. And I kind of, for those women, I say intermittent fasting intermittently, which means you're not doing it every day.
Yes.
But for cycling women, I'm going to say like just about across the board, like 90+% of the time, intermittent fasting is going to be worse on your hormones and physiology than it is helpful. So I generally do not recommend it for any woman who is still getting a menstrual cycle, even in perimenopause.
So amazing. Like thank you so much for sharing that, because it is like, there's so much information out there. And for those of us who are sort of health minded or holistically minded, like it can be really confusing. So hearing from you who's specifically an expert on the hormonal stuff and women's hormones it's really helpful to hear that.
Yeah. Don't do it.
Yeah.
Don't be tempted.
Well, amazing. Is there anything else, just to wrap things up, that you want to add about high sensitivity, hormones, anything along those lines?
Yeah. I will just say there is an overlap with high sensitivity and ADHD. So ADHD is an area that I'm starting to put more of my practice focus on. I'll be doing like I mentioned to you before we got on this on the episode, but a summit for that in the spring. But there is a correlation there. I'm just going to say from the women that I'm working with, and also from personal experience, the shift right now is that older women, and by older I mean like over like 35. I don't mean like you're in your golden years. The older women we discover it because of a child's diagnosis, and women present with ADHD differently than little boys do, which I think for years we had that preconceived notion. And one of the kind of hallmark things is high sensitivity. So there's a much more of a internal kind of look to ADHD for women, but this high sensitivity piece is there. So I'll just say it's probably a minority, of who might be listening. But if you have a kid who's been diagnosed and you are yourself highly sensitive, it may be something to investigate.
Yeah, that's so important. I've had clients who have discovered that they have ADHD during our time working together. And it's such a relief and so helpful to know that about oneself so that you can support yourself appropriately.
I think any way that we can understand ourselves and our physiology is only going to be a positive, whether that's your hormones, whether that's, again, anything that's happening in your body, mood. But I think it can take away from the something's wrong with me feeling, and more just like, oh, this is how my body is, which I am just all in support of. This is just how my body is, and how do I work with myself and not be in a state of like something's wrong with me or I need to fight this. Like working with our bodies, our minds, our moods, our female hormones, all of that.
I love it.
Is so important.
Yeah. And I think that's one philosophy you and I for sure share, because it's when my people find me, they're like, and they find me, sometimes they find me before they realize they're highly sensitive. And then they're like, oh, wow, I'm highly sensitive. And there's so much relief there, and so much oh, wait, nothing actually is wrong with me, even though I thought there was all my life. Right. And it's just so empowering for them and relieving for them.
Yeah.
So yes to all of that. Oh my goodness. Well, thank you so much for your wisdom. It was really educational for me, and I'm sure for so many people. So tell me, people can find you at your website. Where else?
Yeah. So yeah, easiest place is it's the website or Instagram. So, and it's just my name. So my website is just christinemaccarroll.com. And my Instagram is christine.maccarroll. And my last name is a little weird, but it's MAC and all of the consonants are double. That's the way to remember the last name.
MACCARROLL. L. Of course, that's a consonant. Got it. Yeah. I love it. Perfect. Yeah, and we'll put those links in the show notes as well, so people can go directly to them to find out more about you and how you help people.
Great.
Well, thank you so much again, Christine.
Absolutely. It was a great conversation. Thank you.
And to everyone out there listening, be oh so well.